Hello, welcome to the Right on Crime podcast. My name is Christian Cochran. I'm the Florida State Director for Right on Crime. Joining me today are my two colleagues, Joey Comley and Danny Murphy, who'll be giving us a little bit of information about themselves in just a minute. All three of us are veterans who advocate for criminal justice solutions. Just about 8 years ago, I was in the Army Reserve and served in Kosovo. And unfortunately, I was injured during my deployment, so I was medically separated. Since then, I've served in various capacities advocating for veterans. And since I came to Right on Crime, that was something I was very interested in with incarcerated veterans and veterans who are involved in the justice system. I'll kick it over here to Joey so he can tell you a little bit about himself.
So my name is Joey Comley, and I'm the Kentucky and Tennessee State Director for Right on Crime. In my private practice, I represent soldiers and service members of all branches in military, criminal, and administrative matters. I also do a great deal of pro bono work for folks with VA appeals and dealing with the matters that surround the military family, whether that's surviving beneficiaries of service members who have fallen in combat or in training accidents, and also kind of their families when they do, like every other family does, sometimes break apart. So that's the extent of my current interaction with the military. As it relates to professional matters, I also do some work as a board member of a nonprofit that helps veterans as well. On to you, Danny.
Joey, Christian, good afternoon to you both, and thanks for allowing me to join you on this podcast. Joey won't say this, but I'll add it. Joey is also a retired lieutenant colonel, a former judge advocate in the Army, and a Purple Heart recipient, and so he comes from an extraordinary background of service himself. So my name is Danny Murphy. I'm also a retired Army lieutenant colonel, having served for about 20 and a half years in the Army's JAG Corps, the Judge Advocate General's Corps. I retired out of the Pentagon in 2020, and I moved down to Southwest Virginia, where I initially served as an assistant United States attorney, that being a federal prosecutor. And I've gone into private practice with a law firm in Southwest Virginia, where I focus my practice on government investigations and white-collar defense. I also serve as a state director for both Virginia and West Virginia for Right on Crime, where I focus on policy reforms and conservative policy reforms with respect to criminal justice. My work, just by virtue of where I live right now, I don't live close to a veterans population, so my work tends not to focus on veterans work right now, but I remain very interested in veterans initiatives as well. And so I think this is set to air on Veterans Day. And of course, on Veterans Day, we want to highlight the service of all of our veterans. So I commend you both and appreciate your service, and looking forward to the discussion, Christian.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate y'all taking the time. Normally, and we were back in uniform, I'd be saluting both these guys. I was lower enlisted, so I appreciate y'all's time and y'all speaking with us today. So last month, I wrote a blog about healthcare and state prisons as it relates to incarcerated veterans, something that has kind of interested me. Way before I came to Right on Crime, I was working for doing a Wounded Warrior Fellowship with the U.S. House, and something I noticed immediately with incarcerated veterans was the fact that the VA does a wonderful job of connecting veterans with their service or with their benefits for veterans health care about a year out during the reentry aspect. They also do a great job with veterans justice outreach, with helping veterans who are experiencing the early parts of the criminal justice system and going through veterans treatment courts, or even just trying to get them connected there. But in the middle there, when they're actually incarcerated, the VA really kind of steps back. And so I really wanted to kind of look at that. And the Council on Criminal Justice actually did a wonderful report recently, and they discussed the history of healthcare with incarcerated veterans. And by administrative rule, they're unable to tap into those resources. And so states, by default, are then responsible for taking care of veterans' health care. Now, we're all veterans. We understand that there are some unique needs that we have, when it relates to mental health, There was an expansion under the PACT Act, which is passed this couple of years ago and signed in by the president to allow for more veterans to be eligible for medical treatment with the Veterans Health Administration, especially as it relates to burn pits and the problems that could come with that long term. So I just wanted to toss it over to you guys and just get your thoughts. You guys have been around the block a time or two, so it's always nice to hear what y'all have to say.
Well, Christian, I loved your blog, and I think it's getting after a special population. And I think sometimes in conservative circles, folks are turned off by that. Why are we treating one group of folks who interact with the criminal justice system differently than another? Well, in response to that, I often have to remind them that this isn't unique to the veteran population. We do it with primary caregivers. We do it with anyone who's suffering from something that's impacting their ability to make sound decisions, to bring their behavior in compliance with the law. We're always taking that into consideration from point of arrest all the way through their criminal prosecution. So this isn't unique to veterans. It's a human condition. But highlighting something that you said, it's a condition that results from their service to this country. And that's something that I hope people never forget, that the reason they're suffering from a condition that's contributing to their criminal decision-making is because they suffered some type of injury, illness, exposure, you name it, that resulted directly from their service. And when that happens, there should frankly be no administrative regulation, no law. There's certainly no logic that calls for their treatment to stop. Now, I understand the necessity of getting creative with solutions, right? How do we share the savings and the costs and the resources in terms of physicians that are necessary to achieve some continuity of care? But there's really no excuse for the entirety of government, federal, state, local, and all of the tremendous nonprofits that we have to allow a veteran to be failed in terms of their treatment because they're now in the custody of the state or a municipal authority. I know we talked earlier. I think Louisville's got an awesome program in their metro jail where they actually have essentially a vet pod at a jail, which I think is rather unique. I've seen them in state prisons in different states, but to have it in a jail is really awesome because I think you get someone who's reflecting on what happened at a very early point in the process so that they can disassociate from a criminal culture that can otherwise swallow them, and they can start leading that life and going down that path. On to you, Danny. Sorry.
Let me add a thought. And so I think as we all work in the world of policy, criminal justice policy, and I think by and large, when we look at policy, we look at the criminal justice pipeline, and we can focus on the beginning of the pipeline, the crafting of laws, the law enforcement aspect of that pipeline. And then at the tail end, there's not the tail end, but the law enforcement and then the judicial component of that pipeline. And then at the tail end, we're very good at addressing the reentry, individuals coming out of incarceration and reentry for those individuals. But I think where we tend to fail, perhaps, or to not do as well, is focusing on the veterans that are in the pipeline, that are still incarcerated, that are still in jails and prisons. And so there's an aspect that you wrote about in your blog, Christian, that I want to highlight. And you talked about, looking at your blog here, you said camaraderie and the unity of purpose help to restore incarcerated veterans. And I think that's a really good point. And so what I'd highlight in my state, in Virginia has, within the Virginia Department of Corrections, they have 10 facilities that have housing units that are dedicated to veterans. And so why is that important? And why would I encourage other states to emulate or model their systems in a similar fashion? The reality is, if Christian, if you or Joey or I were to walk into a supermarket or a Walmart or whatever the case may be, and we see an older veteran wearing a hat, right, describing a campaign that he or she might have been involved in, I don't know about y'all, but I'm compelled to walk over and to say, hey, when did you serve? Who were you with? Who'd you serve with? There's a certain camaraderie. There's a certain bond amongst veterans that I think is good for the soul. It's good for the human condition itself. And so when we bring veterans together into units within a facility that are dedicated to veterans, that in and of itself can be restorative. It can bring people of like mind and like experience together, where they're leaning on one another to get through what really is some of the darkest days that they're experiencing. I think it's important for those listeners to remember that those who accept the call to serve and stand up and take an oath and serve their country are a very, very, very few. Comparatively, they are a large minority in our country, and we owe them a debt of gratitude, and we owe them a debt of service themselves in supporting them as a country and as individual states. And to your point, Christian, that ought not end just because they have engaged in criminal conduct, typically largely as a result to issues and burdens that they are carrying as a result of their service. And so I would encourage departments of correction to focus their efforts on bringing veterans together and providing dedicated services that allow them to address the issues that sort of undergird their criminal activity.
Definitely, no, I appreciate it, both of you. Joey, going to your point, I've seen it in a couple of our jails here in Florida where they're doing this local programming within the jails that's veterans centric, which is amazing. I mean, I am a very big programs person on the jail level, because honestly, if we can break a cycle before we get to state incarceration, that is incredible, right? And so I always am fascinated with what local leaders come up with and their creative solutions and trying to find ways to keep people out of jail and back in our communities and, doing well. Danny, to your point, as I listed in my blog, Florida Department of Corrections has done a wonderful job with the number of veterans dorms. I mean, so just for context, Florida has 1.4 million veterans in its state. It's huge. Everybody wants to move to Florida, within our Department of Corrections, there's an estimation of around 4,000 veterans who are currently incarcerated. And with those veterans dorms, I mean, I got a chance to see one last year, and it was honestly incredible. And I you see guys that were, served at all eras. And I mean, they stood at attention like they did in formation, X amount of years ago when they served. Right. And it is that camaraderie. I mean, even when we're all together, we all can kind of sit around and, tell war stories and have a good time and spend, kind of understanding, we've all had a shared experience that not many people have. And so when it comes to veterans, that's crucial in their way of, reentry back into our society, because we want to make sure they understand that we can find ways to help them and we can move forward in different ways.
Hey, Christian, let me raise a thought, if I may. And so anytime I've had the good, wonderful experience to speak at some veterans functions over the years for Veterans Days and whatnot. And anytime I speak to an audience on Veterans Day, I address the very reality that while veterans, yes, ought to be, we ought to commend and salute veterans who serve. we really ought to and need to salute the families that support the veterans who serve as well. And so I'm curious, and it's kind of a toss over maybe to Joey, because Joey does a lot of work with juvenile, the juvenile system as well. And so, I'm curious, living, Joey, in a military community, when we look at juveniles and children of veterans who have moved around and perhaps who have grown up in an environment where their fathers or mothers were deployed for a period of time during their childhood, are there systems that you're aware of that focus on veterans' children, on juveniles from veteran families? Are you familiar with that, Joey?
So there's several nonprofits that work in that space, but I would say, like, systemically, those individuals are treated just like any other child who comes from a home where a parent, or perhaps both parents, were routinely absent. You know that a parent can be absent for any number of reasons. One, it can be out of their control in that they were deployed by virtue of their service. Two, can be by drug or substance abuse, such that they're physically present, but they're otherwise absent for all essential parenting functions. And number three can just be that they've been lost to whatever circumstances. And I think, those children are identified early on, typically by social workers that are doing, part of the intake in youth facilities. And they're making sure that, look, that's appreciated by the system. I think, going back to something that I think both of you have touched on, I think the non-veteran audience that listens to this podcast has a direct analogy to our experience. If they're a member of any shared group who achieved like the pinnacle of success, for example, championship teams reunite typically annually. Some people reunite with college graduate buddies or girlfriends from high school even. They relive some of their best moments in their life, their fondest memories. That's what these vet pods provide to those veterans. It allows them to immediately transcend the horrible circumstances they're in and to transport themselves in their mind to a period when they were doing great things of profound impact and importance. So I think when folks look at these vet pods, they really need to not discount that transformative experience that gets them out of the, otherwise anger response. All of us are veterans, right? If you're put in a hostile situation like a jail or a prison, immediately my reaction is hostility. It's not to cower, it's not to submit. That's not how I've been trained. So I think, to expect something different from someone who's had that ingrained in them is wild. But to expose them to a vet pod or something that establishes that familiarity with a time in their life when they had values, when they had a culture of selflessness is profoundly important.
Yeah, and that brings me to a good point where you had a great point I wanted to bring up with that is there's the aspect of a mentorship too that comes into that, right? So you have veterans who, can kind of, guide you along the path. And so I know with the state of Florida, we have a wonderful veterans treatment court across the entire state. We have 33 veterans treatment courts with the most recent one coming online September 11th. And so, it's pretty impactful, as we all understand. Each one of us served post 9/11, so we understand the significance of that. But one of the things I always am interested in is the mentors that come and volunteer their time to come help veterans who are involved in the justice system. I mean, these are incredible people who just give up their time to come help another veteran just because they're another veteran. And so they really want to get involved and try to help somebody. I mean, veterans treatment courts are fantastic. I love seeing the work that they do and how they do hold the veteran accountable, but you know what? They also work towards, connecting them back with those earned benefits. I mean, that's that's a key part of that. If we can get them back with those earned benefits, get them back enrolled in healthcare or enrolled for the first time. A lot of veterans might have never even enrolled in VA. So we can get them back involved, and that way we can get them back on a good path. And so they're, reintegrating with our communities in a positive manner.
And that volunteer mentor program goes well beyond kind of the Veterans Treatment Court. I mean, they're helping folks with getting their finances in order. They'll help them work through like interpersonal communications, lasting relationships. I mean, I've watched them go through like marital counseling workbooks with folks that are going through the criminal justice system. So, I mean, talk about like just really giving all of themselves to ensure that someone is successful in life. My hat's off to all those folks.
That's right. And if we focus anybody that focuses the criminal justice system only on the retributive component of that, right, is missing the boat, right? And so the vast majority of our inmates are going to return to our communities. And for those who are veterans, those who bring with them the scars and the burdens of war or deployments, they need things that others do not. Frankly, they need a kind of a focused care, a focused emphasis on things that people who have not experienced deployments or war or overseas service can really understand. And so, if we're going to get veterans, justice-involved veterans, or if we're going to get them back on their feet and they're going to return them to society to be useful and meaningful, contributing members of society, we need to focus our treatment of them while incarcerated with the same sort of emphasis as we would focus our treatment of veterans who are not incarcerated.
Like, for example, most of our viewers won't know this, and very few that, even if they're veterans, won't be familiar with this, but Danny's seen it as a military prosecutor, and I saw it as both a military prosecutor and as a military defense counsel. But before someone actually goes into a military prison, even whether that's pre-trial or post-trial, they get an evaluation, they get their current medicines, and all those things are taken with them to the jail, and those records go with them to prison. That same continuity of care, I understand it's not necessarily reasonable to expect that from point of arrest to local jail to further processing, but there's no reason that we can't have policy that allows for VA hospitals to be alerted and for them to have some type of requirements within VA regulations, actions that they have to take to communicate those existing medications and treatment needs to the current, custodial facility.
Yeah. Definitely no, I agree. I mean, there are programs that are allow for Department of Corrections or local jails to submit information about veterans to the VA, so they have that information. Now, I'm not sure what the response level is, but that would be something that definitely needs to be looked at on trying to just pass along that information so we have a clear picture of where we need to go. With the VA kind of with them taking by administrative rule saying, hey, these veterans are under the care of someone else, they're under the care, custody, and control of state corrections. That kind of leaves the veteran without the help that may be unique to their service, right? Because veterans might experience stuff a lot differently. And with the rise of telehealth, with having the ability for a veteran to speak to a VA provider, it seems to mostly make sense, right? The other aspect is if they're providing care for these service-connected disabilities, certainly we want to have an ability for states to at least recoup some of these losses that they're having to do because of some of this stuff that may be exacerbated by service, may be really detrimental to the veteran's health and therefore, very costly to states. I mean, we know with Agent Orange, there was a very long list of presumptive conditions that ranged from hypertension and diabetes to as far as like Parkinson's like disorders and MS. And so seeing that, that's costs that are then passed on to the states. And so finding ways that we can be innovative, but at the same time, making sure that there is a shared cost, because we want to make sure that our veterans are taken care of, even when they do commit crimes. So I'll just get your last little bit of takes, and then we'll go from there.
Joey, I'll jump in first. I'll let you close. One of the unique opportunities that I have, and Joey has done this and does this in his private practice as well, is to represent individuals who are accused of engaging in criminal activity. So I currently serve as a defense counsel. I have prosecuted. The bulk of my career has been as a prosecutor. You gain a very, very unique perspective when you represent somebody who is alleged or accused to have committed a crime. And even for those people who may well have committed the crime, you gain a very unique perspective into what creates the person that sits in front of you, right? Every human is the culmination of experiences and circumstances. And so when I look at defendants or inmates who are veterans, that is a huge component of who they are and what makes them up. Why they are where they are, and that perspective is unique. That perspective is important, and it should be considered as we discuss. It should be considered at every portion of the criminal justice pipeline, and that's why, Christian, you were talking about veteran treatment courts instead of the typical traditional judicial proceedings. Veterans treatment courts consider the unique aspects and components of a veteran's personal circumstances. Well, we need to do that when we focus on inmates, people who are incarcerated within the facilities. We have to consider their unique needs and in order to develop them and to rehabilitate them, to return them to society. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss it with you, Christian. I'll kick it over to you, Joey.
Thanks, Danny. Always a gentleman. I think I'm really hung up on the healthcare aspect. And it's because, at least in Kentucky, I've seen how the VA gets an auto-generated report or a report that they can pull from Kentucky state prisons for anyone who's identified as a veteran at their, point of arrest. And at booking. So there's ways to transmit that information, but this administrative rule that cuts off their access to, healthcare is truly troubling. That you have notice, but then you have notice and ignorance on the part of the VA with respect to their responsibility to continue to care for that veteran. And they've been relieved of that by a political appointee. It's a good thing Right on Crime has a national advocate and some folks that can, pound the streets in DC, because I think we have a team of veterans right here who can work with them to kind of use the new administration and its leadership to potentially do away with that rule. But as it relates to administrative rules, that's one of many. Anecdotally, one I encountered the other day involved, you all may know about this, and you may have elected for this. So I've elected to take a lesser retirement so that my wife, Erica, can receive a, portion of my retirement. I think it's 50% upon my death. Well, if Erica goes on, let's say I die tomorrow, if Erica collects on that policy, goes on and marries someone else who's also entitled to that same benefit, they pay into that benefit for 20 more years, and 20 years from now, in 2044, that husband dies. Erica has to choose between one of those two policies and cannot collect both. Unlike other insurance, she'd be entitled to at least recouping those monies that are paid in every month over that 20-year period, plus interest, there's a total zeroing out. And it's, again, by administrative rule. In that case, it's done by the Department of Defense. So this whole administrative withdrawal of earned benefits is not unique to the VA. It's a real problem. And I hope that, the folks that are looking at government with a fresh set of eyes and a new way of thinking will make some of these changes. Thanks for having me on, Christian. Danny, it's always a pleasure.
Danny, Joey, thank y'all both. I really appreciate y'all's unique perspective, and y'all served our nation, and I thank you for your service and your sacrifices that not only you but your families also made. For those who are watching who happen to be interested in trying to help veterans, there's many veterans organizations probably in your local towns. If you also want to reach out about becoming a Veterans Treatment Court mentor, I would recommend reaching out to your local clerks of court that are probably able to point you in the right direction. And please stay in touch with us here on Right on Crime by visiting our website at rightoncrime.com.